Yeah. Yeah. All right. Now we are live.
All right. Welcome back to the Mother-Daughter Land podcast. This is my mother, Ying, and I'm the
Right now
daughter.
we are live. All
And
right.
today we're talking about lots of different things. So my mom's name is Ying. She's the founder of Eastover Estate and Eco Village, a retreat center in the Berkshires of Western Massachusetts. And my name is Hannah, and I'm an artist, yoga teacher. You can always You can always book a reading with me below. I have lots of options for connection and support. So let's get started. What are we talking about today?
All right. So today we have so many topics. And the first one is that I really, really want to hear that your process, when you became like a real spiritual seeker. And then, you turn into a very spiritual person. And then you manifested and you met the love of your life. And then how is that actually, change, the dynamic of your kind of like, say you call it life or you call it like the biggest, reality,
Like my
simulation.
my relationship with spirituality, how that changed after meeting my relationship currently, right?
Yes.
Okay. Well, all right. So I started a path. Well, I didn't know I was starting a path of spirituality per se. Back when I really had no clue what I was doing, and I struggled a lot with depression and trauma when I was growing up. So as I got older after college, I was just looking for answers. And I started learning a lot about astrology and I started learning just lots of different modalities. Yoga, I became a yoga teacher. I became an astrologer over the years because I was so interested in learning about myself and then applying that to help other people. But first of all, learning about myself, that was a huge thing for me because it allowed me to understand some kind of background, some kind of context as to why I am the way I am, right?
Mhm.
And I was so confused still. Like, even though I studied all those modalities and I studied charts and I was like learning all this stuff about pretty much about my ego, right?
Yes.
Um, Nothing was making me feel less confused or less depressed. So then eventually I came across more modalities like gene keys, human design, more that were significantly spiritual, ones that really were like maybe the ego isn't where it's at. So I kind of had this moment, this shift when I was reading something where I suddenly realized how little the ego actually had to do with things, right? And that took away a lot of fear. And I also had experience at that point, I had experience with some psychedelics and things like that, that also opened me up to understanding what everything beyond us kind of is.
Mm.
And then at that point, I became really spiritual. I didn't care much about following desires of my ego. I practiced a lot of like how to be in the present moment. But I still, of course, felt like I was following my soul, like what it liked. And that was my biggest pointer in my life, was just following what felt good to me.
Mhm.
And I kind of started to get this idea of like what would feel good. And, as humans, we're like lonely or whatever. So I wrote down a whole list of what I would want in a partner if I were to ever meet one. I wrote a whole list on like where I'd want to live. I mean, I have lists for all these things, right? And these are very ego things, like human things. But at the
Uh-huh.
same time, it's like, oh, these are things that like really light my soul up. It's not like I'm not doing it for any sort of like ego boost in any way, right?
No.
It's much more just like, oh, this would make me feel open and expanded. So I went with that. And I wrote out these very extensive, detailed lists. Like for my partner, it was like, I'm kind of shallow. So it was like, there was some like, height requirements. There was what he does requirements, how handy he is, uh, his salary. I mean, I wrote out literally everything. There was at least 20 items on that list. And then
Uh-huh.
I just like throw the lists into like some junk pile in the corner and then forget about them. So
Uh-huh.
after about 8 months, really, I manifested this guy. That's my entire list.
Uh-huh.
And I wasn't looking for it. I
Uh-huh.
was pretty done at that point. I didn't want anyone at that point, right? I had forgotten about my
Uh-huh.
list and I was really good, independent, following my soul, whatever. Um, And then he showed up. And then I was
Uh-huh.
like, oh man, okay. And I ended up doing a crazy thing. I was like, in California, traveling, Vegas, whatever. And then I was like, oh, well, I'll like move to Oklahoma for this guy and live with him and his
Uh-huh.
kid, who's 5 years old, right? So, like, just doing this insane thing because this was the guy I manifested and it felt really right. Like, my soul felt so excited and happy about it, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it still feels that way. This is like well over a year ago now, so it still feels
Uh-huh.
that way. But it's insane to think about because I went from being this very spiritual person to suddenly thrown into a house where I have a kid that I'm taking care of half the time and I have a relationship to tend to, right? And then I
Yeah.
still have my I follow my dreams and happy soul life, right?
Yeah.
So this pulls me in a way where I've become much less spirituality oriented because I've had so much more reality to deal with.
Uh-huh.
And how that's shifted in my life is really just I've become a lot more psychologically oriented. So it's become because my focus has shifted from just my relationship with myself and my relationship with greater consciousness, it's shifted from that into,
Uh-huh.
oh, I have to really keep up these physical relationships around me. And
Mm.
that's a huge value for me personally. I've always been a person that values relationships. I just never knew how to
Mm.
do them until recently, right? So
Mm-hmm.
now that I have this relationship that I really value with my boyfriend, that makes me so much more aware psychologically. And I think it's also given me a broader perspective on spirituality because I always hold that spirituality concept. I'm connected to something greater than me. A lot of this it doesn't matter at all, right? But at the
Yeah.
same time, I'm still shallowly here, um,
Mm-hmm.
being very, very hyper aware of my ego because
Mm.
you have to be in order to maintain the relationships around you.
That's right.
Because if you aren't aware of what's happening in ego land, your ego's just going to go everywhere, right? And it
Yeah.
is the hardest thing for our brains to deal with to be in relationship with other people already. So
That's
the
right.
best thing we can really do is just be extremely aware and at the same time constantly learn and grow and be open to what comes up and changing, and I don't know. So I've been more interested in things with the brain, with changing neural pathways, with constantly being in new situations, um, and valuing my relationships enough to stay with them and keep working at understanding my ego relationship more.
Mm. So several things, right? So one, I would say is that when you were this seeker, literally, right? Like physically, all over the world,
Yeah, I
right?
was obsessed. I went across the world. Yeah.
Yeah, across the world. And also is that, you literally also is that anything to do with like the hand, you know, you kind of like, got yourself, you done them because all of these physical activity, like with your hand, whether it's
Like,
painting, whether it's a craft, whether it's, sculpture, whether it's, anything that in many ways actually is almost kind of like a spiritual practice because they are kind of like there's a focus,
well,
right?
for me, so all of that kind of craft stuff, like, uh,
Mm-hmm.
I'm an artist, so I'm constantly making stuff. I also am a baker. I'm constantly making stuff in the kitchen too. All of that stuff is like how I relieve stuff out of me.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a huge part of my ego is
Mm-hmm.
to just how I expel pressure that's building up inside of me. And if anybody knows anything about human design,
Mm-hmm.
some of us in the bottom of our sacral region, some of us are closed beings. So we just have this constant pressure that's rising up and giving us lots of energy. And
Mm-hmm.
we need to release that somehow. Other people are open beings and they don't need to do as much of that. But people
Mm-hmm.
who are closed, like me, like I exercise almost every day. I'm
Mm-hmm.
constantly creating. I'm constantly using up the fire inside of me, right? And
Mm.
that's just how some people are, I think.
So by hearing this is that you are saying is that you have a very well good awareness of this energetic thing that is going inside you.
Yeah, and I think that was a big part of my journey spiritually was really
Mm-hmm.
coming to understand like energetically what do I need? Like how like I wouldn't have been able to manifest this relationship with my boyfriend if I had not first built a really strong relationship with myself and my body and
Mm-hmm.
this human experience that I'm having.
Yes, yes, right. So that's actually, I think that, is the key, which actually a lot of us are not aware that we are actually energetically driven by a much bigger energetic, whole. And we thought that, that we have a lot of control of, our ego thinks that we have so much control of, what we do, and we also have so much expectations in our ego. We expect, when something is happening, what's next, how things should be, right? So
Right.
it's there's that expectation that actually is that it's a separation. It's a separation from this whole energetic thing, which actually is pushing us much, much more than what we thought.
Yes. So the whole reason why I'm still like, I went on this spiritual path. I learned astrology extensively and other chart reading ways. The reason why I'm still now interested in that stuff and I still do readings for people is because what these things are, what these modalities are, yoga, any of these things, any spiritual practice is really just a map for our human experience in this world. And it can help us really be aware of like how we are in space, right? And then also how we are connected beyond that. So
Yeah.
it's like a lot of people without a map get lost, and
Yeah.
that's
So the universe itself, like this whole energy, actually, it doesn't have meaning at all. It's
right.
just like this huge ocean of energy. It's just constantly moving, constantly changing, and it itself has no meaning at all.
But we can use the ego, we can use our human experience as an advantage in
Uh-huh.
order to create these tools in order
To
to
help us,
help us
all of these
feel like
tools.
we have some control over things.
Yeah, so like these modality, each one of them is kind of like they figured out some way of helping you along this path.
Yeah.
So they figured out some kind of, some kind of laws and some kind of, thing that you felt that, you can follow and help you explore about yourself,
Yeah, because it's
right?
really hard being a human otherwise, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you are being pulled, by this whole energy, and it's just literally that, is unknown, you
And
know?
humans are really interesting because our brains, especially because of this ego stuff that's going on, it can be really easy to get swept up and really pulled into it. But if we look at like using maps and using our awareness, we can actually use our ego to serve our soul's purpose. Like
Mm.
we can use our ego to like actually feel better about being here rather than using the ego as a guide instead, you know?
Yeah, like letting the ego kind of like driving you.
Right. Like we
You
would
use
rather
it, like,
use the
you
ego.
use it as kind of like a tool,
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Uh-huh. So basically is that, that we literally, is living in this kind of like, multifaceted, simulation game.
Yeah.
And we ourselves, is like an actor, in
Yeah,
this
and
game.
it can be a really fun game if you let it be,
Uh-huh.
which is really my perspective now is like how fun and positive can I make this game? How many interesting things can I do in this
Uh-huh.
lifetime, right? Like so
Yeah.
there's a lot of different ways that you can view this and enjoy being a human because I think that's really like a big part of it. It's like, can you have the full human experience? Can you experience all the emotions? Can you like be here for everything that's hard and, easy and just experience it and just be here?
Not being, dragged into of the game. And so
Even if you get
this.
dragged into it, it's not a big deal.
Well, the key is that, there are some, things that first of all that kind of like, I think after you realized, actually this whole reality that we are feeling every day in many ways, is kind of like a construct, by our ego. And I think after you realize that actually is that, you also went through a time period in many ways is like a kind of like it's almost like a cleansing process. There's a lot of things kind of like to clean off, like for example, like self-confidence, right, building the self-confidence, you know
Yeah.
and the insecurity, the trauma,
Yeah.
and all of that. So in many ways is that I think that a part of this process of seeking, of spirituality in many ways is
Yeah.
like building this healthier ego, you know,
Yeah,
and
but I also think that there's so many people out there that do not need to have any spiritual experience to live in this way as well. There are people out there that are extremely happy and live very presently and have no experience with anything spiritual. And they went through no, like concrete cleansing process or did any rituals or anything, right? And they're these very present beings that seem to just magically be somewhat enlightened. And so I don't think that there's any wrong way to do this human thing.
uh-huh.
Like the only one I might not agree with is being an absolutely unaware crazy person and just ruining other people's lives without realizing. That one I might not agree with, right? But anything else, I feel like a majority of people are just, they're going along their lives and that's okay. Like everyone is here for such a different reason.
But I think is that actually is that whether we are aware or not is that real life actually in many ways is that it's shaping us. And that actually itself, like living a life itself, that itself actually is a spiritual journey, whether you admit or not, or whether you even aware or not.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
just
most
know that.
interesting part.
Yeah, and I just know that a lot of people are like not very spiritually inclined, right? They don't want to consider anything like that. So for me, it's like, you can view it however you want. You're just on this journey anyways. It doesn't matter what it is or what it isn't, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I felt like, everything actually really is that, even though the whole is as if it's meaningless, but the thing is that it just automatically happens, you
Hmm.
know, and it just kind of falls on your lap,
Yeah,
and
the really interesting thing, like reading people's charts and everything has made me extremely aware of how everybody's purpose is so different.
mhm,
So what the person next to you is going through and what they're learning and whatever, like should never be compared to what you're going through and what you're learning,
mm, mm,
because everyone is really here to learn different lessons and different, have different ideas in their head and different experiences thrown at them. So there's really nothing to worry about.
yeah, right. So the happening is kind of like, really in many ways that, everything just happens equally. Really, there's no kind of like, oh, this happening is better and that happening is not as good and all of that. And the world is like this ocean, it just happens, whatever it happens, it just happens,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But there's one thing that is very important though, is that how to say is that um also do need to be kind of like a little bit aware is that sometimes is that there are certain things we do need to deal with though. Like, it's not like you say, oh, I don't care, what it happens, it just happens, and then you kind of just throw it in the back of your head, but sooner or later, that is gonna catch you up.
Oh yeah, I mean, I will also say I'm a slightly judgmental person because I really value hard work. I especially value psychological hard work. So I'm assuming people are like doing their due diligence to be good humans in their life, right? But if you're not aware of how your brain affects other people, how you following assumptions, expectations, negative thought pathways down holes in your brain, and you're not seeing how all that swirling around is not affecting the people around you, I think that there are definitely things like that are should be changed. Like you should address things in your life that are creating unhappiness around you.
Yeah, so I think that, kind of like actually for most of the people, that's probably where in many ways the value of being a seeker of spirituality. I find myself that since I was a child, have always been interested, about this thing called life. But I was kind of like a pretty lost, and I felt that everything have really, really changed when I met somebody who, was a qigong teacher, and then from pointing out to me that, that I had this blind spot that, seeing things as if everything is around like me. There's a me there. There's this, and that is the ego, But at that time, I couldn't even identify that. I was kind of like, how can, someone say something like that to someone like me? Because I literally my whole life, that dedicated to kind of like serving others, and dedicated to, do things that was all the time, almost all of the things that I have done in my life, except spending 3 years, go to work and support a family and all of that. Besides of the 3 years, the rest of my whole life, I'm always in the work of, doing work to support others, right? So when someone pointing that to me, it was not easy for me to actually grasp what the person is saying. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Right? So, for example, is that a person who is in the work of as if, they're always doing things good for others, right? They always volunteer doing this and that. They're always doing, things that are serving others, organizing events, that quote and unquote, good for others. How could it be somebody like that actually the self is actually, in this as if, there's a tornado, in the middle of the ocean, and then you are just kind of like in the middle of this circle, but actually is that you are circling around of actually of this individual, this individual, this one person, this there's an identity of this self, and actually that was and took me actually several years to come to understand that is that that's where the key is that I didn't realizing, because later on I developed a sensitivity because of practice qigong. I develop a sensitivity of that, I can so naturally feeling of other people's pain. When somebody has a headache, I have a headache. When somebody is having a heartbroken, experience, my heart hurt. And then that actually really helped me understand is that this is self, this is self that we constructed. Actually, it does not exist,
Yeah. And I think you have lots of good points. So I'm going to go over them one by one.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, I think that the reason why it took you so long
Mm-hmm.
to understand what that person was saying to you is
Mm-hmm.
because I think that there is great weight in understanding yourself before you're able to lose yourself.
Yes.
Because I feel like, and this comes to my second point, because I personally feel like I see a lot more of an ability to spiritually be able to lose your ego, to feel greater connection to things. Um, Especially in people who have like gone through psychotherapy or therapy already, right? Like, so they've done this sort of shallow worlds, for lack of a better term, shallow worlds therapy process, psychology process. I think that there's great stuff in that to
Mm,
understand who you are as a human ego in this world.
mm,
Because if you don't understand that, you lose yourself. Let's say,
mm,
like you're just helping yourself for so long. You never really got to, you're helping other people for so long. You never really got to know yourself.
mm,
Like you said, it's a lot harder to understand what's yours and what's not, right?
mm,
And
mm,
a lot of people really pick up other people's energy super easily. We all come from the same thing. Okay.
yes.
So it's like, it's really easy to soak up collective stuff, to soak up whoever's next to you's stuff, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
We
I'm
are only just this part of the whole. Yeah.
right. So I'm a really big proponent for like understand your human self, go through some psychotherapy, like really do something that reflects you back to you, and
Mm-hmm.
then, and then go into spirituality if you want to go deeper into things, if you want to let go of things even more than you did before, right?
Mm-hmm. And
Then,
that's a huge difference of a cultural difference,
yeah.
right? Because, like for example, is that in the West, the Western world, psychology is kind of like the root of like, kind of helping people understand themselves, you
Hmm.
know, while in the East, it's very different. In the East is that when you are born, immediately is that, they kind of like just put you into this pool of hole,
Right.
right?
Right.
They like from the top down, like they have this concept of that you are just part of the whole, and you don't have that chance to actually knowing about yourself as an individual in the society.
Yeah, it's really a foundational difference. And yeah,
And
when
we
the
don't have a psychology.
I know. But when the foundation is really different, like let's say, okay, let's just think a little bit. Let's say in Asia, in China, where you're from, right?
Yeah.
There's a really big emphasis on success, financial success, money, right? Like sort of just like going down this route of being successful work-wise.
No, actually more on academic success.
But academic success. Okay.
Yeah, academic success actually is much more than, whatever the other success. So, in China, Confucian even has something, like, he said that, everything is low class,
Mm.
except that, as a scholar.
Oh, okay, okay. Okay,
Yeah,
so let's say, okay, so we have like scholar idea over here. Let's say
yeah,
in China, and then let's say I grew up with, let's just say this is actually also a little more generational also.
yes, that's
Let's
right.
say my generation is a little more, let's have a foundation of feeling whole inside or feeling like, a little more self-actualized inside, right? Like sort of
Mhm.
let's build a foundation of understanding ourselves so that, like what I'm really trying to get at is in order for you to let go of things in spirituality,
Mhm.
you have to have a good foundation in order to be able to let go.
Mhm. Mhm.
Because it's a lot harder to let go of things if you have a million unanswered questions about yourself. If you, like, let's say, even in China, let's say you were like a complete academic failure, right? Would it be harder? Actually, it might be easier. I don't know now that I'm thinking
No,
about
no,
this.
no. Yeah, if you actually, because everything is measured by your academic achievement, you know, so like your promotion, everything, because it's so many people, competition is hard, right? So the
Mhm.
only way that they able to measure up, like who gets ahead and this and that is all based upon what kind of education that you had, you know?
I see. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it was like, really, there was no chance to kind of like, really thinking about yourself as a human being, like, how you do,
Yeah.
yeah. So, yeah. And so that, and also in my case is academically, I done on my academic, and then I had a good family, and then I went out and dedicated myself to helping others, right?
Mhm.
So so in this very kind of superficial of right seeing is that as if he is a very selfless person, right? you know but actually is that there's just so much unresolved things,
Yeah.
like my experience at the middle school, that difficulty of being join to join the youth league for 5 years, and that really kind of like that I had a huge issue of being accepted, you
Mhm.
know so then because of that is that let's say something wouldn't be not a big deal at all, but this ego, this self, just interpret as, oh, here goes again, I'm this victim, I'm not being considered, I'm not being accepted, I'm not being valued,
Right. And then you end up helping people all the time, being selfless because deep down you're actually
you're
desiring,
looking for approval.
you're looking for that acceptance, that approval.
Yeah, you're
Exactly.
looking for that acceptance and
So,
approval from
yes,
others, from
exactly. So
others.
this is a really good point, which is like we as humans, our egos, like we
Hmm.
always have goals. We always have
Hmm.
desires, no matter what. So you can even ask yourself in spiritual world, right?
Uh-huh.
Like what am I seeking in spirituality specifically? What
Uh-huh.
am I seeking here? Like, what am I seeking in my overall life? Like, what am I like, if you really look around
Uh-huh.
you, look at how you're living your life, how you're doing stuff, right? You
Uh-huh.
will always find a goal. And I think that that's
Yeah.
a really important thing for people to be heavily aware of because,
Yes.
and it's also really important to, I think, talk about in spirituality. Everyone has very different goals. Like your
Uh-huh.
goal, I know for fact, your goal in spirituality is very different from my goal in spirituality, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm a big, like, happiness is always my driver. I'm
Uh-huh.
always looking for ways to amp up my happiness level. And
Uh-huh.
that's what spirituality is to me, is literally just how can I factor this in order to make myself happier? Like, which
Uh-huh.
comes off like somewhat selfish, right? But I think your goal, what is your goal? You can tell me.
Well, I don't know. I think now I'm so different now, is I don't really have a goal anymore, so I kind of like, how to say is that I just kind of like react spontaneously, you know, and also is that I truly, truly began to feel of how everything that happened without really kind of like um a good or bad,
Is
I
that your
really
goal? Is that what you'd
I
like to feel
really
like?
see, I really see that, things they just happen, they just happen, you know, and I felt is that, my way of realizing these things was pretty gradual, you know,
But this
and
is not what I'm talking about.
what I mean is that, is like I don't really go and seek anything. I
I
just
know,
I
but
really have this
you're not
trust.
understanding what I'm saying.
Uh-huh.
I'm saying no matter what, no
Yeah.
matter if you're just subconsciously doing something, if you're not consciously having a goal in mind, you
Hmm.
still have a goal. 100%. I really believe this about humans and their psyches.
Okay.
Like your goal, I know for fact that your goal for at least a year was
Uh-huh.
to just constantly be connected to greater consciousness.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
For I would say is that for the last 3 years, I would say is that I was seeking of like this great connection, this connection with a great consciousness. But at the end, that I found is that actually even this great consciousness itself is only just a conception.
Right. But I'm not really caring about what we find in the end. I'm literally
Uh-uh.
saying that there's great subject matter in understanding what your goals are because it will
Uh-huh.
tell you so much about yourself. Like
Uh-huh.
why? Why were you seeking greater consciousness? What to you was so valuable about that, right? Like there are so many millions of questions you can ask yourself, even in
Yeah.
this world of spirituality or literally anything in your life that I think is a
Uh-huh.
super helpful idea to know.
Yeah. Well, I think the reason for that was that I was really, really, how to say is that, first of all, is that I realized is that over the years, because of my, lack of, let's say, self-awareness, right? And I found is that, throughout of when we are working or whatever that we do, we somehow is that actually is that the body actually is much faster and much connected actually than our head so I found myself, for example, I thought that I have already developed incredible awareness, right? When you are being put in a situation and you actually able to very logically and not being, let's say, touched or moved emotionally by whatever is happening, right? But then I found is that actually our body is actually much smarter than us. We thought our head is smart, right? We thought that, whoa, I did pretty well, right? I didn't get upset, blah, 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 right? But actually, I found is that our body, our body actually already took the hit,
Yeah.
right?
It's really fascinating. Yeah.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating, right? So because of that, I found is that throughout of my body, I actually accumulated a lot of injuries, right? And
Right.
so because of that, and then when I passed the 60 mark, right? And then I suddenly noticed is before that, I was kind of like, was able to kind of, it's like as if, okay, you have pain here, you have pain there, you just sweep it under the rug, right? But when you hit that 60 mark, you cannot sweep it under the rug anymore, you know? It just appears, it just kind of like, it's like, uh, it shows up, you know what I mean? Right? So I think the reason was that that fascinated me of that, how our body throughout the years, because of our ignorance, we thought that we have been doing really well, we haven't lose ourselves, we have been really, like came along a long way, we did very well, but actually our body accumulated a lot of injuries. So, and I think that what I did was that, because of the pandemic, it allowed my work to slow down, and it gave me the opportunity to actually really be with, these injuries, like be in touch with these injuries that are in my body. And then how that through, let's say, whether it's meditation or whether it's practice qigong, to untie these injuries, to kind of like, because they have these knots, they have these
Right.
knots in your body. And then how do you untie this knot? And that fascinated me. And what I have learned is that it's like almost every injury, it's always associated with that there's an ego thing that is in ourself that we did not resolve. So for me was that, so this whole process of untie this knot was a process of like really knowing of this ego, these restrictions that we put on ourselves, and how that we let go of these, restrictions.
Yeah. And I 100% agree with you. I think everything starts the moment anything happens to us, our body immediately responds. And then later on, we realize in our head what happened.
That's right.
And it's so fascinating because many people are extremely disconnected from their bodies. And
Uh-huh.
so, you know, I've worked with people as a yoga teacher who have just had stuff in their bodies for decades, right?
Uh-huh.
From old traumas or whatever it is. And so this is why I'm a big advocate for, you know, having some sort of bodily practice. There's also plenty of methods out there, somatic experiencing, Rosen method, plenty of body methods out there to address what is stuck in your body.
Yeah.
But a lot of people, that's terrifying, right? They go to these
Uh-huh.
sessions and they're absolutely terrified of the stuff that comes out. Okay, you also need a psychotherapist, therapist, somebody to talk to about that stuff, right? So there's so many different layers to everything. And then eventually, the scary thing is that a lot of times the body, it's hard to access immediately, right? So you need
Uh-huh.
to build this relationship for a long time in order to really understand
Yeah,
what,
because we don't know.
right? We have
We
no
totally
idea.
actually ignorant. Like in my case, accumulating for, who knows, 60 years,
Right.
50 years, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
No?
exactly. So, and the body is like also the last part of the healing process. It's the very start, it gets hit first, and then it's also the last part usually. Even after you feel like you've done all the work in your brain to
Uh-huh.
dissolve stuff, to untie
That's
the
right.
knots, you've connected to greater consciousness a million times to get rid of this
Uh-huh.
stuff, right?
Yeah.
In the end, it's always the body has yet to release the final things. And
Yes.
usually it's only by going into the body that you're going
Uh-huh.
to find that that stuff's even there, you know? So a lot of times people will have stuff that they've dealt with already,
Uh-huh.
years of
Or what
their
they
whatever
felt they dealt
they
with.
felt they've dealt with.
Yeah.
And, you know, they're going through their life and then they're like, what is this thing coming back up for? Right? Like, what did
Uh-huh.
I not deal with here? Okay.
Yeah.
Usually that's hidden in the body somewhere.
Yes.
So, so it's a really, we are such complex, interesting beings to be
Yes.
for this lifetime. And
Yeah.
we should embrace it. It's actually really fun and interesting.
Yes, yes, that's what I find that it's fun and interesting and it's very fascinating,
Mhm.
because is that, most of us, we don't have this connection. You thought that I just have a pain, right?
Right.
And then especially with the Western medicine, a lot of people, they go and get a surgery for this, they do surgery of that. But actually the issue is that there's even surgeons that they found that somebody has already amputated of their leg. And but they still feel the pain in the leg
Right.
that's
The phantom
already not
limb.
there,
Yeah.
right?
So
Because
it's really
psychologically didn't deal with.
right. So it's really like we can get very clouded as humans, because the body is so important to our existence. We can get
Mm-hmm.
really, really clouded in letting our physical pain and stuff that comes up to really overtake our lives. And
Mm-hmm.
if you're not dealing with that stuff underneath, which is this is really much harder said than done. This is a really hard thing to do, is to go into the deeper levels of your body and psyche to get rid of the stuff. So you're not having all this whatever physical stuff coming up. And
Mm-hmm.
it's nearly impossible because we
Mm-hmm.
do not currently speak the same language as our body, right? We can't
Mm-hmm.
just ask it what's going on, right? We can build a relationship to understand, but it's like having a dog essentially. Like it's like I can never converse with you to really know what you're upset about right now, but I
Yeah.
can try a million things to see if it's going to work to fix it, right? So it's like that. But the better you build this relationship with your body, like a dog,
Mm-hmm.
the more you can understand each other and work with each other and even learn how to comfort each other, even when you
Yeah.
can't fix the problem, when you just don't know what it is, right?
Yeah,
Because
actually, that's the interesting part. What I have find is like through yoga or through, qigong, right? Qigong is basically a Chinese yoga. It's a breathing, practice. And so basically what happened is that, that actually is that, well, first of all is that, my body developed this sensitivity, to the happening, the overall happening in the world, right? Somebody is giving a lecture, across in China, or is a war that is going on, seeing blood, whatever. The body immediately reacts to that because we
your
are
body.
literally,
Yeah.
yeah, my body, because our body, each one of us is energetically connected to the whole,
Right.
right?
But some people
So
are much more sensitive to certain things.
yeah, so I developed that sensitivity, right? I would experience of all this pain, which is actually not my, individual body pain, but the body pain of others, right?
Right.
So
But
first,
I would argue that there's probably something deeper within you that's allowing that access
oh
to
yes,
happen in
yeah,
a few.
yeah, I actually so gradually, then I had to develop this like awareness
Mhm.
because when you just blindly feeling of others' pain, but you have no awareness, and then what happened is actually these pain they actually stay with you even let's say the lecture is already finished and your stomach pain is still having pain right so then I had to develop this awareness that okay immediately when this pain happens actually immediately that I became aware oh okay this is because the other person right but part of the reason, let's say, for example, why, for example, my stomach is especially, like a sensitive, it's because that I went through something that, some engineer, really did something, really unprofessional. And then I end up, have to like deal with this for many years. And then during that process, my stomach, every time when I thought about this thing or when I, deal with of the work, my stomach literally tie up like a steel flat, like a steel, very tighten up, and that greatly, affected of my spleen and my stomach, but
Right.
to to develop that awareness helped me through of, practice meditation and practice qigong, and to develop that awareness and to let go of and be aware of that tightness, and then to let go of that,
Yeah.
and at the end, understanding is that how to say, even though, that he is somebody who done all these things, but still is that, that for the receiver, there's nothing really personal about it, and there's an emptiness, behind that, and you just have to let it go. And that was a part of the reason I think that, for example, is that my stomach was especially sensitive, that I can sense of other, when they are tight, and I know it right away. But having that awareness, knowing that that moment, that pain that on your stomach actually is not even yours, was a great connection with my body. And so that, then I can immediately let it go so that it doesn't linger on me and affect me,
Yeah. And you like everyone is different in this way. Like, I do not get other people's energy in me
Mhm.
on me often. Um, they really have to be like, pissing me off to do that. But
No, but I thought that you have a sensitivity though, right? For
I
example,
have
you have
awareness.
sensitivity to feel how my body feel for sure.
Yes, but like a lot of it is more
Because of the emotional connection.
because of emotionally understanding people. Yeah.
I see.
Being very hyper emotionally aware of people's feelings. Um,
Uh-huh. So it's
but
different.
like it doesn't, yeah, but I feel very much like I do have quite a bit of a shield from other people's
Mm-hmm.
emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So like, I generally don't come off as very empathic towards
Mm-hmm.
people or sympathetic to their problems. And I think that that is a big part of the shield, right? Which is also why I'm like not really inclined to get rid of that because because it does protect me to an extent, right? I don't get
Uh-huh.
as many people dumping on me or whatever. And that has also just come from being in these professions of having to listen to people's problems in
Yeah,
astrology
that's
or
right.
working with people's bodies and having to protect myself, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that the body, like you're saying, you realize you have the tightness and then you try to release it. So the body is extremely like we can be very it's always going to give you the smallest warning sign if you pay
No,
attention.
yeah. Actually, the reaction from the head is way, way much slower. But of course,
Okay.
through practice, you develop that awareness, you pick it up right away,
Yeah, so if you think about, back when you were very unaware, right?
That's
You
right.
would have just been completely numb to
Oh,
it.
yeah, for
Would have
many
never
days.
noticed, right?
Yeah,
But
several days later, and then you're realizing, wow, why suddenly I became depressed? I was totally, very, very well, very good, right? Until that I went to go and spend this weekend with this person, and suddenly I was like totally a different person,
yeah. So like I have practiced so many different things for to have extreme body awareness because it's so
Uh-huh.
interesting to me personally. Even just in my exercise routines, I am
Uh-huh.
so fixated on how do I develop more proprioception, more awareness, more, whatever it is. I love doing that. And
Uh-huh.
I've noticed that my body will just immediately signal things to me. Like the smallest, slightest thing, I will have an awareness of, and I
Uh-huh.
will then be able to, I'm like a supplement health freak. So I will then be able to like, just know the things that I need to do to prevent this from growing into anything, right? So
Uh-huh.
it really is a practice.
Yeah.
It really is it's a, you know, it's a practice, and it's also you must choose to do it this way, because there are some times that like honestly I will like notice the signal and I'll ignore it and I'll
Mhm.
let it go a little bit longer, and then I'm like, well, you know, because we're humans, we have other things going on. We don't really,
That's
whatever.
right. But I think
Whatever.
I'm the opposite. I think that, through a big part of my life is I was kind of like a very kind of unaware, because I think partially also because I was more of a logical person and studied also, science, right?
Hmm.
So like analytical was more of that the first part of my life, all of my skills were developed around of being analytical. And that's a very, very brain activity, you know
Hmm.
so there's this huge ignorance of like be aware of your body, and
Right.
this huge and also I wasn't like not like you and dad are very like a sensitive people, and when you are at a scene, you right away kind of like aware of everyone else's emotions, where they are, aware of the surrounding and all of that. I'm kind of like totally the opposite, right?
Yeah, she's usually the cause of the issues in the scene. Let's just say that.
Actually,
She's
I
the
do, but I have
tornado
no
coming in.
idea. Actually, I do not know. I have I have no idea, right? Like also I was a very straightforward person, because when I was growing up, I was the last child, I was very well, loved and spoiled by my mom, right? And so I didn't develop, awareness of about others, I kind of like it, just this free spirit, just go ahead and do whatever I am doing, right?
Right.
So
Yeah.
very, very different, I don't have this thing of like a too detail, I don't have this thing aware of, emotions of others, that, was kind of like pretty ignorant.
Well, let's touch on, so I think that it's fascinating that, like, from what I'm hearing and what I have observed in the past few years with you and your spiritual practice, I think it's true that a big goal of yours was to heal your body in a lot of ways and
Hmm.
protect your body by connecting to greater consciousness. And
And
I,
also develop the awareness of the surroundings and the connection to others. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. So,
Because my practice made me realizing that I'm actually not a alone, kind of individual. It's like,
right.
and then I noticed all of my hurt, it has something to do with of this, unaware of this ego, self-ego,
Yeah.
this
Oh,
separation. I felt like all the pain and all of that actually came from like this separation, you know.
yeah. But I'm just pointing out that our paths in that way, or with the body, in relationship to the body, our paths are extremely different.
Hmm.
Because you use greater consciousness to become aware of your body, to become aware that you're not the only one. You have these empathic tendencies to pick up other people's energies because you're part of the collective. And I really keep my relationship with my body very closed. I am not like, there is no, for me, my body is extremely disconnected from greater consciousness. If
Hmm.
I'm in greater consciousness land, let's just call it that, Right now we're in mother daughter land, but when I'm in greater consciousness land, then I am my body does not exist. I'm not trying to fix it. I'm not trying to heal it. It does not exist. There's nothing going on there, right? When I'm here in my human land, my human form, and I'm in my body, I am extremely connected to it at all times. I'm constantly
Mhm.
aware of it. I'm constantly shifting it, moving it, doing things for it. I'm also constantly healing it, fixing it, changing it. I have a very active physical practice, and I go to massage therapists and acupuncturists and physical therapists now, in order to adjust things.
Mhm.
And that in the end also adjusts the brain, right? But we won't talk
Mhm.
about that. More so, I want to just point out how fascinating it is that you use greater consciousness to connect more to your body, and I
Yeah.
actually use it to disconnect, right? So it's very fascinating. And you use greater consciousness to understand the collective, and I
Uh-huh.
really use greater consciousness to just, destroy the self and not have any
Well,
connection.
actually, the real truth, the real reality actually is that, that we are just this one great
Yeah,
consciousness.
I know.
You actually is that, that there's no of this kind of individual like a
Yeah.
body, and there's no distinction actually.
I know, we all know that,
Yeah.
but I'm just pointing out human
Uh-huh.
brain perspective, right?
Uh-huh.
Everyone's experience of things is so dramatically different, like what we're here to be here for and what we learn from these things. It's so different that no
Yes.
one can actually be definitive about anything, right?
Oh,
Like no
no,
one
and
is
you
right or
actually
wrong about
don't
anything.
know.
Yeah,
Yeah, right. It's unknown,
yeah,
and I find that, it really is that at the end, I felt like, to set my heart on the unknown. Like, not I know is like, for example, is that you in your profession, right? You really, when you as a human, you really study this connection because that is your best tool to help others and yourself, right? But for me is that I have found is that that really is that I have to set my heart really to the unknown, you
yeah.
know
That's your goal. See?
yeah, that's my goal, is to set my heart on the unknown. And
Yeah.
that's what really is that, the ultimate peace that I have,
Yeah. But
Yeah.
everyone is so fascinating because you're like that, right? And
Mhm.
like this is why I'm like, it's charts and stuff are so interesting because we can
Uh-huh.
really go in and dive in and see that you're like that. You're very
Uh,
like, you have to not know things in order to go through with things because,
yeah.
you just get bored. And I'm very like, I need a plan. I need a goal. I need to know what it is. I need to know why I have those goals, right? Like I
Uh-huh.
need to nitpick every single thing about my brain and make sure it's okay. And then go down the path and just end up in somewhere totally different anyways, right? So like it's really about like everyone's so different, but if getting to know yourself, like I don't know, I feel like that's so helpful to so many people to understand themselves better so that they feel okay in how they do
Uh-huh.
things, you know?
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, but the one of the thing I find is so fascinating also is that I really, really every moment I feel is that, I'm just this kind of like something, projected me out here,
Like an alien.
Yeah, yeah, like an alien, I'm being projected. It's like as if, there's a projector somewhere, and then projected me here,
Right,
and then
you're just like seeing everything as a movie or like a
yeah,
simulation.
and I'm just like kind of like, this robot, and then like, experiencing of this, what is called life,
Yeah, and you'll like be on this for like a year or two, and then you'll move on to the next phase of however you're viewing things, right? So like it's really interesting. Nothing's ever set in stone.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, so we'll call it today, and
Okay.
then we'll continue next week. And thank you very much, Hannah. Okay, so
Thank
now,
you.
yeah. And